Thank you, Olga. I hope. I don't know what you said, but I believe. Okay,
It
thank
was
you.
only truth.
Yeah, I believe so. Thank you and welcome, everyone. Okay, so I will speak in English. I will speak about structures of time in David Pinsky's The Eternal Jew and the way it relates to midrash and ritual sources that preceded it. So I'll begin. Theater is an art form that develops through time and shaped its audience's temporal experience. As such, it also participates in society's temporal imagination. That is, the way a society understands time, its movement and structures, its history, its present, and its future. In what follows, I will trace these dynamics in The Eternal Jew, originally called The Stranger or The Foreigner, a Yiddish play by David Pinsky, first published in 1906 and performed in Hebrew by Abima, first in 1919 and then in 1993, as part of their highly successful early repertory. I also need to mention that this paper is part of a wider research project about the performance of rabbinic literature in Hebrew and Israeli theater, supported by a grant by the Israel Science Foundation. The Eternal Jew is a dramatization of a legend from rabbinic literature, according to which the Messiah was born at the same day of the destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem by the Romans. The legend first appears in Lamentations Rabbah, Eicha Rabbah, a compilation of midrashim from around the 5th or 6th century CE. In what follows, I will first briefly discuss the rabbinic source and some ritual customs that eventually derived from it, in order to explicate some of the temporal traditions Pinsky worked with. And then I will move on to analyze the play itself and the ways in which it remolds time and the Jewish temporal imagination. The tale in Lamentation Rabbah tells about a Jewish person who was plowing his field. As his ox bellowed or mooed, an Arab person went past him and told him to unyoke his ox and plow, since the temple of the Jews was just now destroyed. When asked how he knows this, the Arab replied that he learned it from the mooing or bellowing of the ox. Then the ox bellowed again, and the Arab told the Jew to yoke his ox and plow once again, for the Messiah was born. The Jew asked the Arab for the Messiah's name, the name of his father, and his place of birth, and then the Jew sells his ox and plow and starts traveling from town to town, selling clothes for children. Once he arrived to Birata Arava at Bethlehem at Judea, which is the name of the place that the Arab gave to him as the birthplace of the Messiah, the Jew noticed one woman who didn't buy any cloth for babies from him. When asked why, she told him that her son was born under bad luck since the temple was destroyed at the day of his birth. He replied that he's certain that the child will also be linked to the rebuilding of the temple as the future Messiah. He gives her some clothes and a few days later visits her at home to collect the money and to see the child. However, once he gets there, she confronts him and tells him that a great whirlwind has whisked her child away. He replies, did I not tell you so? That next to his birth, the temple was destroyed, and next to his birth, it will be rebuilt. And that's the end of the story in Lamentation as well. In terms of time and space, the story can be divided into 4 units or scenes. First, the encounter between the Jew and the Arab at the Jew's field. Then, the Jew's travels as a peddler of cloth. Then, the third scene, the Jew's first encounter with the mother at the city. And the final and fourth scene, the Jew's second encounter with the mother at her home a few days later. Between these scenes, varying temporal images emerge of the relation between destruction and redemption. The first scene depicts the intrusion of the mysterious Arab into the mundane everyday life of the Jew. The Arab, who clearly possesses some extraordinary knowledge, informs him that the mundanity of the everyday has been broken by the destruction of the temple, a crisis in time symbolized by the act of unyoking the plow. However, a few moments later, the Arab announces that the everyday can now resume, for the Messiah was born, so he can yoke the ox and the plow again and return to his work in the field. If the story was to end here, one could conclude that the time of the state of destruction is bounded, and its length is extremely short, between the ox first bellowing and the second. However, the story's ending suggests a different temporal scheme, and it is quite puzzling. To begin with, it is unclear how the abduction of the child by the wind is supposed to prove the child's connection to the temple's rebuilding. And it clearly offers little consolation to the mother, who probably won't ever see her child again. Given that the reply serves as the story's final statement, it becomes even more enigmatic. Why was the child Messiah abducted, and by whom? Where is the Messiah now? And when is he supposed to come back? Will he return once he's an adult, a matter of few decades? In the very far future, will he never return? The story remains frustratingly opaque on this matter. In temporal terms, the Messiah is snatched away from historical time without any mention whereto. There is therefore a fundamental tension between two temporal images within the story itself. While the story continues to reassert that the Messiah had been indeed born next to the destruction, and that the time of pure destruction is as short as the time between an ox's two bellowings, it simultaneously makes this birth implications open-ended and impenetrable. Consequently, destruction changes from a limited phase to an ongoing state of events without a concrete end in sight. The idea that the Messiah was born close to the temple's destruction continued to reverberate through Jewish ritual custom throughout the ages. The summertime fast of Tisha B'Av, the ninth day of the Hebrew month of Av, which is exactly next week, is the time in which, according to tradition, the first and second temples were destroyed. During Tisha B'Av, Jews are not allowed to eat, drink, wear leather shoes, have sex, wash themselves, or study the Torah, and they are supposed to be engaged in mourning and lamentations in a subdued spirit. It is through the annually recurring ritual performance within the Jewish calendar that the memory of the destruction was embedded in Jewish consciousness. However, there is evidence of popular customs from the Middle Ages onwards, especially among women, of relaxing the mourning practices from midday to some degree due to the belief that the Messiah was born on Tisha B'Av. One of the earliest mentions of this custom from the 14th century speaks of an ancient custom of women to wash their hair from around noon onwards in Tisha B'Av to commemorate the Messiah's birth. 18th century Rabbi Chaim Yosef David Azulai, also known as the Chida, also mentions sweeping the house, making the bed, and other domestic chores in honor of the Messiah. These accounts record an ongoing tradition of ritual practice that reshapes the temporal experience of Tisha B'Av. According to these practices, the day of Tisha B'Av begins with mourning the destruction, but as it progresses, a whiff of hope for redemption is added, giving the day a more linear narrative. At the same time, since this is part of ritual customs, it also recurs every year. Thus, it is not only the destruction, but also the redemptive birth of the Messiah that returns annually to the present time of ritual performance. These are the temporal traditions Pinsky inherited and reworked in The Eternal Jew. Pinsky dramatized the rabbinic story as a one-act play. The action takes place in the marketplace of Birat HaArava, the birthplace of the Messiah. The play begins with the villagers getting news of Jerusalem's destruction, followed by the arrival of the stranger, the Jew from the original tale. The stranger appears as a peddler, presents himself as a sinner who did not join the Jewish battle against the Romans, but rather clung to his private piece of land. This is something Pinsky adds to the story. He tells about his meeting with the Arab and how he now wishes to atone for his misdeeds by finding the Messiah. He therefore seeks the child's mother, but when he meets her, she tells him of her son's unfortunate birth. She did not wish to give birth to him while the temple and Jerusalem were at the brink of destruction. She initially refused to breastfeed him and confronted God about the child's very existence. Then, a handmaid and an old man arrive to the marketplace from her house to deliver the news that the baby has disappeared by strange winds. The stranger then miraculously transforms into an old man, the eternal Jew, and leaves to seek the Messiah throughout history, leaving the bereaved mother behind. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Do you hear me? Yeah, okay. There are clear echoes of the legacy of Greek tragedy in The Eternal Jew. The play includes a multitude of villagers serving as some kind of chorus. Pinsky adds a tragic hamartia to the character of the Jew that does not appear in the original story. In his version, the stranger was plowing the field rather than join the rebels against the Romans in Jerusalem because he was more interested in his own possessions than in the welfare of his nation. At the end of the play, he is punished for this lack of national solidarity. But another aspect of Greek tragedy that has direct implications to temporality is Pinsky's adherence to the so-called three unities of time, space, and plot. In order to retain the unities of time and space and condense the dramatic action, Pinsky focuses on the third and fourth units of the story, those taking place at Birat HaArava, the city. The events preceding the stranger's arrivals, i.e. his encounter with the Arab while plowing his field, and his long travels through villages and towns, all these are narrated by him to the villagers as an exposition. The playwright also conflates the third and fourth units of the original story, so that instead of having the stranger wait a few days and then visit the mother at her house, Pinsky disrupts the conversation between the stranger and the mother in the marketplace with messenger figures, a maidservant and an old man who inform the mother of the mysterious disappearance of her son that has already transpired while they were talking. The condensing of time gives the play a classic appeal, bestowing upon the midrashic material the same kind of cultural prestige that Greek mythology has when it is adopted to tragedy. The original story's many travails, the destruction of the temple, the birth of the Messiah, the Jews' travels, the baby's kidnapping, are all condensed into one swift sequence of revelation, anagnosis, and drastic change. The past travels of the Jews as a peddler from village to village are downplayed and transferred to his future travels as the eternal Jew in search of the Messiah. These future travels are of utmost importance because through them, Pinsky retains the original tale's open-endedness, but adds another crucial element to it. While the rabbinic story ends with the Jews' reassertion of the child's messianic role and nothing else, in the eternal Jew, the stranger undergoes a startling transformation into the wandering Jew, a long-standing anti-Jewish Christian stereotype according to which the Jews were cursed by everlasting homelessness due to their rejection of Christ. In the eternal Jew, however, the image's meaning is reconfigured. While the Jews wandering are indeed a punishment, it is due to his rejection of Jewish nationalism rather than of Jesus. Furthermore, the Jews' wanderings are not mere landlessness, but rather an ongoing quest to find the Messiah. In fact, it would seem that rather than wandering in space, as the original image of the wandering Jew has it, the stranger will be wandering in time. Given that the Eternal Jew is the first play in a tetralogy, with the rest of Pinsky's plays called Messiahs, dealing with various historical Messiah claimants such as Bar Kochva, David Reuveni, Shabtai Tzvi, it is implied that the stranger's quest will lead him across Jewish history to find the Messiah that was born and lost in the destruction. As opposed to the rabbinic story, in which the child was simply abducted to an unknown destination, the Eternal Jew suggests that the Messiah was taken forward in time to the future history of the Jews. It is in history that he will be sought. If the original Midrashic text removes the Messiah from history, Pinsky uses its open ending precisely to bring it back to history. If the Midrashic narrative offers a linear and open-ended temporal scheme, and subsequent ritual customs suggest a cyclical, repetitive temporality, theater, in a sense, combines both. It tells a linear story, but repeats it night after night. However, what is repeated in Pinsky's theater time and again is not the hope of the Messiah's birth, as it is in ritual customs, but rather embarking upon seeking the Messiah in Jewish history. It is the plunging into Jewish history time and again in order to find potential seeds of redemption that becomes the task of modern Jewish theater. Thank you.
Thank you, Yair, for this fascinating presentation. So now we have time for questions, please. Yes, Karina. Yeah.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Yair, thank you for the paper. And I was wondering if you talked about two attempts by the Habima Theater to stage the play. And I was wondering what they changed, if they changed anything about the original play text and what those changes were. And did they make the same changes both times they staged it, or were there differences? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Karina. I would say I'm not yet certain. Maybe somebody else will be able to answer your second question about the different two stagings and why they returned to stage it again. To my knowledge, they didn't change. The text wasn't changed. I mean, it was translated into Hebrew. Of course, there's another layer in the Hebrew translation itself. And I would also say that there is at least in the 1923 performance, which I have a bit more visual, I saw a bit more visual documentation of, this notion of the play as Greek tragedy is kind of strengthened by the set design, which has a bit of an archaic, it's kind of an archaic space that can be somewhat reminiscent of Greek theater, of ancient Greek theater. There is a sense, I would say the whole visuality of the play very much tries to kind of revive sense of like classical antiquity, but in a Jewish Hebraic kind of context. So, which is very strong, and I would say also very different from other, like from the Dibuk and the Golem, the other two major plays of Habima at the time, which kind of went later, like to later Jewish European culture. This is their first attempt to kind of go back into antiquity. So there is something in Habima's visual language that very much, I think, strengthened this notion of the play as kind of a taken classicism, and using this. So this, I think, was this is what strikes me the most when I kind of look about that. But regarding the two performances, I fear I don't have, like, I don't still get what happened there between these two performances. So, but maybe somebody else does, because I know we're going to have some other presentations surrounding this performance of Habima's.
Maybe I can add just a few words about very practical issues regarding these two performances. Just the first one was not successful. The first version of the performance was not successful at all. And actually theater didn't know what to do with it. And the second performance that was presented to the public after the D-book, and of course had the influence of the artistic language of Vakhtangov and the D-book. It was a kind of present for Chidelov. Maybe he understood, Chidelov, the director of the performance, he and also the actors understood better how to deal with this material. The D-book was not connected to the Bible thematics, but with it, it was mystery play, and Vakhtangov was working on it more than 4 years, and it really was very helpful for the theater, for all participants of the theater to come back to Pinsky play with the new experience of mystery performance that was in the D-book. But maybe Boris can also say something about this.
It's actually an issue of my paper that not the two versions of the Eternal Jew, but generally it's true, because the first version of Eternal Jew was the very first work of Habima students, actually in studio. it was the very first work, and they came back to Eternal Jew after Dibuk, after 4 years of studying Tvachtango with Stanislavski, and so it was more successful performance than the first one.
And if I may, if I can just share one photo, because this I did find now. If you can see, this is I'm sorry for the Hebrew, but this is like the set design for 1923. Yes. So, which you can kind of get, I don't know, for me gives these connotations, this Greek classical connotations put in a Judaic context. So this is just to finish my earlier comment.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Thank you. Do we have more questions or commentaries? Yeah, that was very interesting for me to hear about the difference between the initial version of the story and what was done in Pinsky's play, and this another kind of rejection, the rejection of Jewish nationalism and not the rejections of Jesus. So, do you know something about the really what had happened in Habima performances? Did they understand this, the change that is so crucial?
Yeah. So I would say there are two changes here. One is a change from the original story, which it's clear that Pinsky writes a national play, while the original story doesn't even mention, when you read the story in the Midrash, there is no mention even of a war against the Romans. There is a mention of the destruction of the temple, but there isn't any military context. Generally, the rabbis tended to kind of downplay the militaristic aspect of the destruction of the temple, of the second temple, and kind of emphasize the religious and ethical aspects of the destruction and not so much the political military ones. So when you read the original story, there is no mention of I think there's no mention of the Romans. There's definitely no mention of a war, of a rebellion against the Romans. The temple is just destroyed. That's all. There is no military context to it, or even national context, like nationalistic context to it. And there is no hamartia. Again, there is like no sin. The Jew makes no sin in this story. He just gets the information, goes and tells the mother, and that's it. There's no sense of what is his motivation, and there's something. There are many things that are not there. While in Pinsky's plays, the rebellion against the Romans is the center, and the fact that he didn't join the rebellion, but was some kind of, I don't know, privatized capitalist, kind of just dealing with his own possessions and not seeing, having no national solidarity. This is a sin, and he's going to be punished for it. And also the mother, which I kind of skipped, has a very long and beautiful monologue about how she wanted to join the rebels and fight herself, but being pregnant with child, she didn't do it. So, and she feels guilty for not joining the war. And one of the reasons there isn't a father in the story, which is there isn't a father in the original story, but this is not commented upon. It's not. But in the play, the issue is that the father is out there fighting. So one major change, and this is definitely something Pinsky does, I think, as a modern Jew at the time of modern Jewish nationalism, is kind of rereading this play, rereading the original story as a nationalist story. The sin is national, and kind of like the atonement would be, okay, I'm going to go through Jewish history and find the Messiah because I didn't have this national solidarity. And I think this is something the Habima did pick up. I mean, from this sense of giving a national meaning. We know they do it with a golem as well, kind of taking Leivik's play, which is not very nationalistic, and kind of giving it a more of a national interpretation. So this, I think, is something that Habima my feeling is that Abima did pick up on that. The shift from the Christian wandering Jew to Pinsky's wandering Jew is a bit more tricky because the play is called The Eternal Jew and not The Wandering Jew. So you have to kind of, but once you look at, I'm sure we'll see it soon, the iconography of Tzemach becoming the wandering Jew with the stick, and I think he's barefoot if I'm not mistaken, I don't remember right now, but you'll see the actor who plays the Eternal Jew, the stranger, you can see that the iconography that they're using very much echoes Christian iconography of the wandering Jew. And he's off to wander, he's off to trap. So they definitely, in a sense, they even perhaps strengthen something that is implicit in Pinsky's play, but maybe in the iconography, in the visual iconography, they made him even more resembling the Christian image of the wandering Jew. And it's a good question. I mean, how much this, again, because he becomes this wandering Jew because of a sin, how much they're trying to evoke this image of the Jews as wandering or as homeless or in exile because of a sin, but not the Christian sin, but the Zionist sin, right? The sin of not being part of Jewish nationalism, something like that. But I don't have a very good answer, but these are my thoughts.
Thank you. Really, I think that this question or this difference between wandering Jew and the eternal Jew is very interesting, and we can discuss it at the end. Okay, thank you.
Здравствуйте еще раз. И я попытаюсь объяснить сейчас выбор спектакля для реконструкции спектакля про Цемаха и ту перекличку, которая существует в судьбе Нахума Цемаха, ставшего главным героем спектакля Габима в 2017 году, и вечного странника, вечного жида, героя драматической поэмы Пинского. Я хотел бы отметить для начала, что спектакль под названием «Вечный странник» впервые появился в репертуаре Габима еще в ее домосковский период, в 2013 году. Это была пьеса Осипа Дымова, которую труппа Цемаха сыграла в Вене в дни 11-го Сионистского конгресса, и ее сюжет был посвящен выселению евреев из приграничных районов Галиции. И пафос ее был понятен, он вызывал к сочувствию народу, вечному страннику, обреченному на бесконечные скитания, и подводил к мысли о необходимости обретения национального дома. И на самом деле это название «Вечный странник», было понятно, что оно доминантным в культуре еврейской, европейской культуре того времени применительно к еврейскому народу вне зависимости от принадлежности тех, кто высказывает эту идею к сионистскому движению. И, безусловно, это была абсолютно очевидная метафора. И случайно даже роман Шолом Алейхема, который о еврейских актерах назывался «Блуждающие звезды», что, в общем, можно перевести как «Вечные странники». Таким образом, появление в афише Габимы 2013 года «Вечного странника» Дымова было абсолютно закономерным. И тем более, что одной из главных декларируемых самим Нахумом Цемахом задач было обретение еврейским театром своего дома в прямом физическом смысле, как известно, в Иерусалиме, на горе Скопус. И когда в 1917 году Нахум Цемах, Менахем Гнесин и Хана Ровина вновь встретились в Москве уже, и в марте 1917 года объявили об открытии театральной студии Габима. Первой работой, за которую взялись студийцы, троица, уже упомянутая, и присоединившиеся к ним первые артисты Габимы, первые ученики, это была работа, это был «Вечный жид Пинского». Понятно, что эта тема, эта пьеса соответствовала и отражала устремление театра, устремление его создателей И работа над репетицией «Вечного жида», его первой редакции, начались еще до того, как Цемах совершил свой исторический визит к Станиславскому, и художественный театр и Вахтанга стали принимать участие в работе Габина. Понятно, что то, что в отличие от пьесы Дымова «Вечный странник», «Вечный жид» Кинского основывался не на неком актуальном материале, а на Мидраше из Талмуда, тоже в гораздо большей степени соответствовало устремлениям основателей Габима. И тем более это получило дополнительное обоснование после того, как художественный театр взял Габиму под свое крыло. Габиму стали называть библейской студией художественного театра, и, соответственно, «Вечный жид» в этом контексте название место действия и источник спектакля, конечно, больше, чем пьеса Дымова, соответственно, отражали эти намерения и эти устремления. И «Вечный жид», премьера которого состоялась в конце 1919 в начале 20 года, стал первым полноценным спектаклем Габимы московского периода после вечера студийных работ. Это была первая пьеса от начала до конца, поставленная в театре. Поставил ее Всеволод Мчеделов. И спектакль в первой редакции тоже объясняет во многом его отсутствие признания. Во-первых, это была полностью ученическая работа. Это были совершенно, не обстрелянные студийцы, которые, учились играть фактически с листа. Во-вторых, спектакль шел без музыки и в очень-очень скромных декорациях Павла Узунова в 1919 году. И, конечно, он не был овеян, имя Габима еще не было овеяно легендой Габибука и феерии этого успеха, и поэтому критика приняла этот спектакль сдержанно, и вполне возможно, наверняка это действительно был ученический спектакль, который не привлек к себе особого внимания. Но, конечно, для самих студийцев, для Габима этот спектакль имел огромное значение. Менахем Гнесин писал, что «Вечный жид» был первой пьесой из того рода, о котором мечтала Габима, трагедией из еврейской истории. И Гнесин также отмечал, что если вечер студийных работ требовал от актеров реалистической игры, то «Вечный жид» поставил перед ними новую проблему – проблему трагической игры. И здесь, пишет Гнесин, мы блуждали, как слепые во мраке. Одна из немногочисленных рецензий на «Вечного жида» в ее первой версии Михаила Загорского отмечает, что чувствуется, пишет Загорский, что прошлогодняя работа, имеется в виду вечер студийных работ, была только подготовительной, и что театр уже прошел через этот искусств всечеловека и устремился к элементам национальной трагедии, выявлению форм и особенностей, свойственных еврейской драматургии и театральности. И из актеров, всех участников спектакля, Загорский выделил именно Цемаха. По его словам, Цемах дал очень интересный внешний рисунок, и в его изображении этот вечный странник на вселенских дорогах вырос до должных и соответствующих замыслу драматурга символических очертаний. Ханна Ровина, которая играла мать пророка в первой редакции, так же как и второй, особого внимания критики в 19-20 году не заслужила. Но после смерти Вахтангова, когда Габима находилась в кризисе и тоже не знала, куда обратиться, на помощь вновь пришел «Вечный жид». И было решено восстановить этот спектакль в декорациях Георгия Якулова с музыкой Александра Крейна. И это был уже с теми же участниками, и действительно практически, видимо, без изменений текста и структуры спектакля, режиссерской в том числе. И в 23 году она привлекла, эта работа, этот спектакль действительно уже был успешен, и обращали внимание куда больше, в том числе и куда больше обращали внимание на Ровину после ее успеха в роли Леи. И тем не менее Цемах не потерялся и на этом фоне. И хотел бы привести цитату из статьи Максима Горького, который посмотрел «Вечного жида» 3 раза. Такое впечатление на него произвел этот спектакль. И он писал, что роль героя пьесы играл прекрасный артист Цемах. Он дал потрясающий образ пророка эпохи разрушения Иерусалима. Он играл с нечеловеческой силой и убедительностью. «Что тебе, русскому атеисту, Иерусалим и Сион? Что тебе гибель храма?» – вопрошает разум. А сердце горестно трепещет, видя муки пророка, который предчувствует несчастье народа, видя суетность народа, который осмеивает вещи и предвидения пророка своего, муки его разможженной души. Для самого Цемаха роль пророка стала особой. И впоследствии он играл и в «Гадибуке», и в «Сне Якова», но никогда не добивался подобного успеха и никогда не привлекал к себе такого внимания критики. Его хвалили тоже, но именно роль прохожего стала его звездным часом на сцене. И в нее он полностью перевоплощался, и в этой роли он ничем не напоминал себя в жизни. Вот вот фотография Цемаха, и он же в роли пророка. Его действительно здесь очень трудно узнать, и он виден на фотографии так, задумчивый, мягкий, круглолицый человек, без какого-то намека на повышенную эмоциональность и способность вводить в некое экстатическое состояние своих собеседников или зрителей. И Шимон Финкель, который встретился с Цемахом в Берлине в 1923 году, писал в своих воспоминаниях, что Цемах был человеком с внешностью директора цирка. Но действительно в роли прохожего он добился некого совершенно полного перевоплощения и мог, так же как и в жизни, он мог захватывать людей своими речами, также и на сцене он производил некое почти что магнетическое впечатление. И когда в 2017 году в Габиме возник проект совместный с театром «Маленький» поставить спектакль, посвященный биографии Цемаха и его драматической судьбе, как бы абсолютно естественным показалось вовлечение, интеграция в ткань этого спектакля, реконструкцию именно «Вечного жида». Сценическую композицию на основе переписки Цемаха с его женой Мирьям, воспоминаний актеров Габимы и архивных документов создал режиссер спектакля Михаил Теплицкий. И в личной истории Цемаха можно без труда обнаружить параллели с сыгранным в «Вечном жиде» прохожим, потому что он оказался обреченным на вечные странствия, умер непрекаянным вдали от той страны, в которую он так стремился, и, к слову говоря, вдали от той страны, в которой он познал свой первый и, пожалуй, единственный успех. Можно сказать, что когда игра Нахума Цемаха во многом заложила фундамент экстатического театра, о котором так часто писали после премьеры Гадибука. И «Вечный жид», который стал поворотной точкой для Габимы во многом и для самого Цемаха, и для его актерской карьеры, стало понятно, что присутствие этого реконструкции спектакля про Цемаха является пожалуй, необходимой деталью. И с точки зрения театрального языка «Вечный жид» тоже был явно ближе Теплицкому, чем, например, Гадибу. Поскольку некая однозначность метафоры Пинского, и она соответствовала интересам режиссера, который также стремился быть как можно более внятным и однозначным в изложении своего нарратива истории Габимы и ее основателя. И в этом, конечно, понятно, что при всем при том, при стремлении Теплицкого к однозначности, было понятно, что Нахум Цемах был противоречивой личностью, и что, с одной стороны, он был грозным театральным пророком, не боявшимся обивать самые высокие пороги от дома Станиславского до кабинета Сталина, и умевший произносить пламенные речи на собраниях, диспутах и увлекать за собой людей. А с другой стороны, это был как бы обычный директор театра, не гнушавшийся интриг, отчаянно боровшийся за свое право остаться руководителем, женившийся на актрисе своей труппы и ревностно защищавший ее интересы, даже если это мешало процессу рабочему в театре и вносило разлад. И, условно говоря, существовали, по крайней мере, два Цемаха. Один ничем не примечательный еврейский учитель с застенчивым взглядом, и другой страстный пророк с горящими глазами из «Вечного жида». И Теплицкий абсолютно очевидным образом делал спектакль про Цемаха пророка, и этим определился его выбор актера на главную роль. Гиль Франк, конечно, играл пророка из «Вечного жида» изначально, нежели учителя из Белостока. И вторая редакция «Вечного жида» в 1923 году была встречена, как я уже сказал, гораздо более благожелательно. И снова я хотел бы привести оценку игры Цемаха. В данном случае это Лев Никулин. Он пишет: «Цемах – трагический актер, полнозвучный, патетический, неприторный и не истерический. Он светится мыслью, она всегда в нем». И Марголин отмечал также, что пророк Цемаха в неожиданных поворотах своей безумной головы, в своей непоколебимости и в своей фанатичности стал образом библейской силы и экспрессии. И как бы сказать, можно сказать, добавить, символом трагической судьбы самого актера. И тема вечного странничества Цемаха проходила контрапунктом через весь спектакль. В самом начале Цемах появлялся на сцене одинокий и неприкаянный и обращался лицом к стене с надписью «Габима», и вплетенные в ткань повествования письма Цемаха его жене Мирьям Гольдиной, отправленные им в 1935-1936 году из Палестины в Америку, сливались в горький монолог странника, не находящего себе места. И появление Цемаха в роли прохожего из «Вечного жида» было интегральной частью сюжетной линии спектакля. И перед Гилем Франком, исполнителем роли Цемаха, стояла дополнительная задача — сыграть пророка, сыграть прохожего в «Вечном жиде», но не столько самого пророка и прохожего, сколько Нахума Цемаха, играющего прохожего. То есть это, как это бывает в спектакле, это актеры предстают перед зрителями в дополнительном преломлении. Они играют не столько персонаж спектакля, который играет в спектакле, сколько персонажа, который участвует в нем. И, соответственно, то же самое относится и к другим участникам спектакля «Габимы» и театра «Маленький», которые исполняли другие роли. Теплицкий, разумеется, не собирался буквально воспроизводить на сцене спектакль «Габимы». Его задачей было обозначение основных его примет, основных его черт. И таковыми, как в первой и так и во второй редакции, были массовые сцены. Еще в рецензии на первую редакцию «Вечного жида» Загорский говорил о существовании в спектакле стихии множества, явленного как некое сценическое единство. Во второй редакции из таких отличительных черт можно, конечно, ими стали декорации Якулова, пестрые и пышные костюмы, обозначавшие Древний Восток. И, по сути дела, это была одна из первых попыток еврейского театра представить на сцене танахическую библейскую землю Израиля, Эрец Исраэль. И И впоследствии эта попытка еще была неоднократно воспроизведена и в Габиме, и в спектаклях театра Оэль, во всех поисках еврейского театра молодого первой половины 20 века. И в этом смысле «Вечный жид» дает повод для более широкого разговора об особенностях ориентализма в еврейском театре первой половины 20 века, пытавшимся нащупать код национального искусства, опирающегося на фактуру Танаха. Намек на декорации Якулова, представлявшие собой округлое возвышение в центре сцены и выстроенные в ее задней части ступени, можно было увидеть и в конструкции Полины Адамовой, выгородившей пространство для спектакля. Намек на пышные костюмы в расшитом пестрыми лентами платье блудницы Марты. Облик прохожего практически полностью совпадал с оригиналом. Хотя в первой сцене «Вечного жида» Гиль Франк, играя Цемаха, играющего прохожего, не пытался воспроизвести экстатическую манеру игры своего персонажа. И я хотел бы, чтобы мы посмотрели сейчас фрагмент небольшой из спектакля. Секундочку.
לא מירושלים ולא מסביבותיה. ועדיין אומר אתה כי חרב הבית. ובו ביום נולד המשיח. הוא ינחמנו מכל צרותינו. אצלכם ולזכרנו לקראת הבא. נביא! די נודע לך הדבר. לא נגלה לך. נביא! נביא! נביא שקר! לא נביא, אני לא בן נביא. נפתר החוק בגליל, לפרוץ המלחמה ברומאים יצאו כולם, לעזרת העם, להילחם במלחמה. אני נשארתי בביתי, לאבד את אדמתי, לא יצאתי. בעפר במקלול! וואו! אל תשתתו אותי לא כאן היה לי בשביל בביתי. מלחמה חזקה, כמה מנשיית, עד האדמה יחיה דקה. בוגד אני. עיר אחרי עיר קבוע רומאים מעל ארצנו הקדושה, ואני ראיתי זאת ולא יצאתי לעזרת העם. בוגד אני.
И играя со смыслами и меняя оптику, можно было бы сказать, что это была третья версия «Вечного жида» на сцене Габимы. И в этом случае сама биография Цемаха была бы своеобразной фрейм-стори для драматической поэмы Пинского. Она была разделена в спектакле на 3 фрагмента и фактически представлена от первой до последней сцены. И по окончании финальной сцены «Вечного жида» наступало время финала Цемаха, и Гиль Франк доставал из внутреннего кармана фотографию Цемаха, ту, которая была, я показал ранее, и прикреплял ее к закрывшейся для него навсегда двери Габимы. И Франк, пророк, с мечущим искры глазами смотрел на фотографию и как бы встречался взглядом со своим совсем не героически выглядевшим прототипом. И если заглавие «Вечный странник» на афише Габимы в 1920-1923 году воспринималось абсолютно однозначно, вечный странник – народ, ищущий путь вновь обрести свой дом, то и сегодня в спектакле Габимы в 2017 году ее можно было прочитать и как историю человека, художника или политика, противостоящего толпе, или просто любого человека, не принимаемого своим окружением. И также как история Цемаха в спектакле Теплицкого, это была не попытка свести почти век спустя счеты с его противниками, и не какая-то попытка разобрать старые театральные сплетни. А по сути дела это была история вечной непрекаянности не только и не столько, возможно, еврейского народа, сколько непрекаянности человеческого духа, его загадочных свойств, позволяющих ему подниматься до небесных высот, но не удерживающих его от падения до самых глубоких низин, так как об этом делалось на сцене Габимы в спектакле «Гадибук». Но Цемах на сцене Габимы 2017 года обнаружил духовное родство с легендарной вахтанговской постановкой, с куда более скромным, занявшим куда более скромное место в истории «Вечным жидом». Спасибо.
Thank you, Boris. I hope that part of the audience succeeded to hear and to understand. There were sound problems with the translation. So now we have some time for questions.
I'd be happy to ask a question.
Yes, please.
And I hope I wasn't able to hear everything, so I hope maybe you said it and I missed it. So I apologize if I ask something that you said. Did the connection between Nahum Tzemach and the role of the eternal Jew, I mean, he played that role, but the connection between him as, I don't know, the prophet of Jewish theater or the visionary of Hebrew theater and the role that he played, was this a connection that people at the time commented upon? Did they note this? Did people kind of make this connection that you later did in your performance?
You mean the 20th or 20th century?
Yes. Did people kind of say this is his role, like in a deeper sense?
No, nobody marked that Tzemach is the prophet of Jewish or Hebrew theater in that time. I guess that Tzemach himself considered himself as visionary and as prophet of the Hebrew theater, but I think that some people in Russia felt his extraordinary strength, but it wasn't the commonplace or something like that. It was actually it's today the theater and the director of the performance could see it like this.
Yeah, because it's I think it's interesting. Because you have at that time in Abima, like the famous actors kind of being really connected to a role. You have like Hannah Ovina, the Dibuk is her thing, and also the mother here is her like defining roles, and Meskin the Golem, this is his defining role. And it's interesting, I think you do something in the performance saying this role is Tzemach's defining role that kind of actually continues that, but brings him back into the story, which is very interesting.
This was the role of Tzemach on the stage, but because of all the developments, and
after
it just.
Did someone replace him? Did they continue performing it after he left, and someone replaced him?
They continued to perform it after he left, and they played it in Europe and in Palestine in 1928.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I can't say who played this role in Habima. I just know in the original program of the performance in Moscow, Tzemach was aside Moshe Alevi, like
wow,
double cast.
Well, both left.
But both of them,
yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think that what is very interesting about this performance in Habima, I mean not the Eternal Jew, I mean Tzemach, the new one that was done a few years ago, that it was an attempt of archive reconstruction, performative archive reconstruction on the stage. And this is absolutely extraordinary event for our theater. So what do you think about the possibilities of this reconstruction? I'm even not talking about the performance itself, but as a way of thinking about the history, as a way about the reconstructing the theater history in an attempt of performing it.
I think that this performance actually is proving that it's possible, that such way of performance has the right to exist, and I think that it depends of all of the context of the frame performance, but as far as I feel it, the Eternal Jew in the performance about Tzemach played its role, and it boosted the main thought of director, and it underlined the thesis that Tzemach actually was the prophet of the Hebrew theater that was rejected by the people, and actually he turned to the eternal wanderer, and so and we see that the attempt of reconstruction of the performance, that we have pictures of the Eternal Jew in Habima in 1923. It's connected. It's not the literally reconstructed on the stage, but you can feel that it's the performance, and I think that you can feel the spirit of this performance, because also the Teplitsky uses the language of Russian and Soviet theater studios generally in all the in Tzemach, and the source of this language is in I think in beginning of the Russian theater in of the beginning of 19th century, and in of course Stanislavski and art theater studios and Vakhtangov and so on and so on.
And was it clear to the audience that it's not just a biography performance about Tzemach and his life and his problems, but this is a reconstruction of, an attempt of reconstruction of theater language.
I think that part of audience realized it. In the critics was mostly positive, and not everyone got this message of the performance, but hopefully I think that at least some of the spectators, some got it like this.
Okay, thank you. Do you have more questions? Okay, then we'll move to our next speaker, Фредди Рокем, кафедра театрального искусства Университет Тель-Авива. Тема его доклада «Иврит как язык сцены. Москва, Прага, Иерусалим». Please, Freddy.
Thank you, and hello, everybody. Can you hear me well? I'll change this slide. Okay, sorry. And thank you especially to Olga, who organized this panel with various views, and I'm going to speak about the Hebrew language on the stage. Because the Hebrew theater was an integral component of the Zionist movement and the creation of a new Hebrew culture. With its first performances in schools, with children performing for their parents, beginning from the 1890s, and with amateur theaters from around 1905, it was gradually becoming professionalized just before the First World War. The Hebrew theater realized the Zionist utopia on the stage by speaking Hebrew. But Hebrew words also appeared visually on the stage. And in my presentation, I want to give a few examples of a visual presence of Hebrew words participating in the performance. They have usually traveled from the Hebrew Bible to the theater stage. And I will begin by sharing my screen. Okay, can you see that now? So I will begin by speaking about the Dibuk, the performance that premiered at the Habima Theater. It wasn't the first performance, but premiered at the Habima Theater exactly, or not yet, just a century ago. It tells the story of how Leah's father breaks the vow to have Leah marry Hanan, the son of his close friend. In the first act, Leah and Hanan meet in the synagogue, and without knowing about this vow, they recognize their love because of the higher forces that are involved. So this is the set for the first act, with the two words Shema Yisrael written above the stage. It's not part of the space itself. It is a kind of commentary on what is going on in the synagogue. Of course, importantly, that the Torah itself, the Hebrew Bible, is inside here, and the words have traveled to here. So Shema Yisrael are the two first words of the sentence saying, "Hear, O Israel, our Lord, our God, the Lord is one. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad," from Deuteronomy, the 5th book of the Torah, verse 6:4, which is said twice daily in the prayers. It is the first prayer parents teach their children. The last words, this is important for the theater, for this performance, the last words a Jew supposedly utters before his death. And Hanan dies after hearing that Leah has been betrothed to another person. Here is in the performance itself, Leah and Hanan, the two words. They're more prominent here than in Altman's drawing. So they become, he dies, so the words are really a premonition of his last words that are being said. And after Hanan dies, after hearing that Leah has been betrothed to another man, the second act is the aborted wedding, when Leah becomes possessed by the dibuk of her true lover. And the dibuk is the spirit of a dead person who has died under suspicious circumstances and or has not been properly buried. Sorry. So what the words here are kol chatan v'kol kala, meaning the voice of the bridegroom and the voice of the bride. And it appears in Jeremiah a few times. And it's really in the book itself, it's a threat that if you don't follow the word of God, there will be no voice of the groom and of the bride, which is what the words, the voice of the groom and the voice of the bride. So it's a reversal of the biblical sentence, which is used in weddings for one of the 7 blessings. In the performance itself, it also gets an ironic twist, because what happens at the wedding when the dibuk enters the body of Leah, the voice of the groom, the true groom, her lover, Hanan, is inside the voice of the bride. So it's not two separate voices, but it becomes one voice. So the first 2 acts are related to hearing and a voice, which is how the dibuk appears in the performance, speaking through Leah's mouth. In the 3rd act, it's the exorcism of the dibuk in the home, or in the home of the rabbi. There are 2 words, Hashar Ladonai. And in all the photographs I've seen of this act, the word God, Adonai, is a little muddled. It's not clear. And the whole sentence says, Ze hashar Adonai tzadikim yavobo. Lord, this gate of Lord into which the righteous shall enter. So does this mean that when you enter this door to God, which both Leah and Hanan have done at the end of the play, they are in a utopia or in a dystopia? The dibuk, Leah and Hanan, in the dibuk, Leah and Hanan become unified in the next world, the world to come after death, but which is also the next world of the cosmology of the dibuk, which is Yerida letzorech aliyahi. Coming down to this world is for Aliyah, and Aliyah is of course very strongly connected to the Zionist movement. So this is one example of how the words from the Bible are used both ironically and as a kind of force which lies outside the theater, really, the force of the Bible itself, for this project of saving Leah from the dibuk. My next example is a little more multi-sited, because it's, on the one hand, I'm going to talk about Kafka's Hebrew studies. He studied Hebrew, he began studying Hebrew during the last years of his life, after he was diagnosed with tuberculosis, while ostensibly documenting Kafka's Hebrew studies, the notebooks, there are 5 in Oxford and there is 1 in the National Library in Jerusalem. They also tells the larger story of the revival of the Hebrew language as a vernacular language. Each person realizes his Zionist desire by studying Hebrew, and this is what Kafka does by studying Hebrew. This is the first page of the notebook, and if you would do it in the Hebrew way, the first word that Kafka studied was mabat, which is translated as blick, gaze or glance, and Ansicht for view, outlook, notion, or judgment. So we get a view of Hebrew through moving through this book. Another word, which, I mean, there are about 500 words in this notebook in Jerusalem, but another word that I want to draw attention to, which also becomes very important in the performance that I will talk about, the Ruth Kanner performance, is this word, shachefet. Shachefet appears twice in the Bible, in Leviticus and in Deuteronomy. It was usually translated as tuberculosis, also in the Luther Bible, but Kafka is reading another Bible translation, and the translation that he gives, and maybe you can decipher this word, it's Schwindsucht. Schwindsucht is a very unusual word in the German language. It is a combination of the word Schwind, which is the word for verschwinden, to disappear, and Sucht is like in Sehnsucht, is it, where there is a longing. Sucht is a quest or a search, an addiction. So the word Schwindsucht means a nostalgia or a desire to disappear. This is, of course, a very strong word for somebody who begins to study Hebrew when he is diagnosed with tuberculosis. But I don't think he was primarily, or maybe he was also primarily interested in the word itself, shachefet. We don't know if it really refers to shachefet, to tuberculosis. It's also used in a prophecy that if you don't follow, you will get these all kinds of ailments and illnesses, and shachefet is one of them. So, but one of the actresses in the performance of Ruth Kanner has shown that on these pages there are several words from a specific parasha in the Bible. It's the portion that is read on a Saturday in the synagogue, which belong to Leviticus, to the place where shachefet is in the Bible. So it's not only the shachefet, it's actually possible to prove by looking at this page that Kafka was reading a particular portion in the Torah in Leviticus to study Hebrew. Nobody has done that before. They have lots of thoughts about what he read, if it was Brenner or if it was newspapers, but here there is a reference to the Leviticus passage. So this is how Hebrew is handled by a writer in Prague, by the Habima Theater in Moscow, at a time in Moscow when really nobody or very few people in the audience could actually understand Hebrew. So it was magic around it. Kafka began to get a fair, good demand of Hebrew, but Hebrew was not an achievement for everybody. The achievement of Hebrew becoming a vernacular everyday language. Already in 1926, the scholar to be, because at this point he was not yet really so famous for his scholarship, Gershon Scholem writes a letter to a philosopher, the German philosopher Franz Rosenzweig, German Jewish philosopher, and talks about the Hebrew language. I will read you a short section from this letter. This country is a volcano. It harbors the language. One speaks here of many matters that may make us fall. More than of anything else, we are concerned today about the Arab. But much more sinister than the Arab problem is another threat, a threat which the Zionist enterprise unavoidably has to face, the realization or the actualization of Hebrew. Must not the conundrum of a holy language break open again now, when the language is handed down to our children? Granted, one does not know how it will all turn out. Many believe that the language has been secularized and the apocalyptic thorn has been pulled out, but this is not true at all. The secularization of the language is a façon de parler, a way of speaking, a phrase. It is impossible to empty out words which are filled to the breaking point with specific meanings, lest it be done at the sacrifice of the language itself. So the language, as the quote goes on to say, is an abyss, a danger for the future of a state where it will be spoken. I think we can talk about this in many contexts, but one way of saying this is that there is a dibuk in the Hebrew language itself, the thorn. So I want to move on now to my second, more theatrical example. It's the Hebrew Notebook and Other Stories by Franz Kafka by the Ruth Kanner Theater Company. As the National Library in Jerusalem, the Israel National Library, was planning its 120th anniversary in 2013, 12 Israeli artists, among them Ruth Kanner, were invited to create a work of art connected to the library or based on any of its holdings. This resulted in the performance, as you can see here, which was inspired by the notebook kept in the archives of the library. The Jerusalem Notebook became an important component of the performance itself, both visually and orally, serving as the blueprint for a performance montage where the Hebrew language was the protagonist of a multi-layered narrative, including Kafka's Hebrew studies, as well as Hebrew serving as the vehicle through which the actors in the group have developed their artistic virtuosity for telling stories. The performance is a self-reflexive, meta-performative of the group's ongoing examination of Israeli narratives and their origins, based both on literary and documentary sources. Instead of presenting a coherent fictional universe or situation in their performances, the group has developed and explored intricate networks of storytelling positions. Rather than staging dramatic situations with actors impersonating fully visible dramatic characters who make their entrances and exits into or from a fictional space, the storytellers transform the space of the performance itself into the context for establishing a dialogue with the spectators. In these cases, I will suggest inviting us to participate in Kafka's World Theater, or the Nature Theater of Oklahoma, as he calls it in America, the novel America. The performance consists of two parts with a short transition between them. The first reveals how the Ruth Kanner first learned about the Kafka's Hebrew Notebook and presents information related to Kafka, including quotes from Benjamin's Kafka essay posted on the walls. It can be seen as a documentation of the preparations. So it takes place in a white box gallery. During a short transition, and I will talk about this transition more in detail, the spectators are invited to the second part of the performance, which takes place in a more traditional, here is the transition, we're invited into the room where the actors are studying the second word of after Mabati Stam. This is Kafka's handwriting. So here is how Stam becomes part of the performance. So there they also read stories. Here is the Shachefet. Here is Schwindsucht on the wall. Shachefet is appearing on one of the, here is again Schwindsucht. It becomes chaotic. They're telling stories, and it ends with the story Shakale und Araber, jackals and Arabs. Some of the words from the notebook are screened on the wall behind them, reinforcing the sense that besides serving as a blueprint for the performance itself, they had also served as the foundation for Kafka's own writing. A writing which talks about the growing chaos, and of course, Arabs and jackals and Arabs is the only story of Kafka which really refers directly to the Middle East and what is today Israel. So I will only refer to this little moment which is called the Kabbalat Mila ceremony, Tekes Kabbalat Hamila, which is when you pass from the gallery to the more classroom-like performance space. It means receiving the word. It's a strange Hebrew collocation that evokes an ambivalent tension between two existing ceremonies. The first is Kabbalat Shabbat, the ceremony for greeting the day of rest. It means, Kabbalah means receive, to accept. It's also, of course, part of the Kabbalat Shabbat ceremony. And it's also the mystical Kabbalah, the theory of mysticism. And the second part of the expression Kabbalat Milah is another ceremony called the Brit Milah, the circumcision, through which the Jewish male child is brought into the covenant between God and Abraham when he is 8 days old. But the word Milah, with another meaning from another lexical root, also means a word, entering through the door. We're literally receiving a word from the notebook. By evoking the double meaning of milah for word as well as circumcision for the creation of a covenant, the ceremony implies that by receiving the words from Kafka's Hebrew notebook, we become initiated to the work of Kafka through the art of performative storytelling. It is also important to note that among Orthodox Jews, there is actually a ceremony which the male child undergoes at the age of 3, when he has learned the Hebrew alphabet and can begin to read the holy texts. During this ceremony, which is the ceremony following the circumcision, first ceremony following the circumcision for the religious Orthodox boy, he is fed with a cookie in the shape of a Hebrew letter dipped in honey. The Kabbalat Milah ceremony is, however, much more than an educational trigger, with the spectators moving from one space to another. When we are asked to participate in this ceremony and pass through the door from the gallery space to the classroom, after the allotted time for the presentations of the preparations for the performance has passed, we are greeted by a friendly doorkeeper who gives us a card with the matching words in Hebrew and German from Kafka's notebook. No, where was it? This is one of these little cards. On one side, Shachefet, and on the other side, Schwindsucht. It begins through this simple action, the spectators are staged in a situation which is a reversal of one of Kafka's most well-known texts, Before the Law, Lifnei HaChok, vor dem Gesetz. It begins with the doorkeeper, this story, telling the man from the country, asking for admission to the law, that this request cannot be granted now. And subsequently, this man from the country will be kept waiting outside the gate to the law his whole life. And as he approaching his end and finally asks why no one besides he has sought admission to the law, the doorkeeper answers, shouting so the dying man can hear him, "No one else could have gained admission here because this entrance was intended only for you. Now I will go and close it." but instead, in the performance of the Hebrew notebook, we have all been permitted to enter the law established by the study of Kafka's Hebrew notebook. And as we will see in the stories the actors tell inside this space, organized as a classroom which begin with is governed by order and discipline, the stories themselves, ending with the only Kafka story which refers allegorically to the Zionist project, Jackals and Arabs, all tell about how chaos gradually overcomes everything. Thank you.
Thank you, Freddie, so much for this inspiring presentation. Extremely interesting. So let us talk a little bit. Do we have questions?
I would like, thank you, Freddie, for this. I would like to return to this concept of secularization. And if you think that Habima's performance of the Dibuk on the one hand, and Ruth Kano's performance of Kafka on the other hand, were secularizing performances of Hebrew.
I'm sure that for the Habima people, Hebrew had been a language exclusively used in the synagogue where they grew up. And they were now putting a synagogue on the stage with an ark for the Torah. And they were performing something which their parents would never have dreamt about, while putting the holy text, the holiest of holiest text, Shema Israel, in the front and giving it an ironic interpretation. I'm not sure who and how much they could talk about this, but I'm sure they knew it. Then, of course, the Shah to God, the gate to God in the end, but there is an utopian element in this in itself, a religion. And Habima is, of course, not only the name of the theater, which means the stage, it's also Habima, the place where you read the Torah in the synagogue. And they choose this name very carefully. So I recognized in Boris's comments on the sort of the biblical studio idea of Habima. Which it took them a while before they did any biblical play, but they had Bible on the so. And now with Ruth Kano, of course, is a very different. I mean, this is almost 100 years later. For her, I think Kafka's notebook is the holy, is the scripture, and it leads in various directions. And I think she's really exploring some of these. And I think that the structure of being let into the law is extremely important for what the theater can do. It can open the law. And if you remember the text of Kafka in the Before the Law passage, there is a light coming underneath. Ein Glanz. Glanz is a very powerful word in German. It's also connected to circumcision, and it is also connected to the light that comes out from this law, and of course the Bible is there as that law. So we are let into it, but what we see there, as I argue, is chaos. So it becomes. So there is a holy scripture. It's the notebook. Thank you. Good to see you.
More questions? Actually, I have two questions. One is also connected to the secularization subject, because when you were talking about it in in the context of Habima and Habima actors, I was thinking about European audiences. Was it the same for them? Because Hebrew was fascinating for European spectators. But can we see the same function for this kind of audience?
No, I don't think so. No.
So
I don't know what Gorky felt when he saw it, or other, or Stanislavski, or.
But I'm not talking even about Gorky and Stanislavski. I'm talking about German public and French public, and everywhere where Habima was coming to present the D-book, because you convinced me absolutely, talking about the importance of secularization for Habima actors, but then they came to Europe. So not Russia. They came to Europe, and European public felt the fascinating power of this performance. But the accent, I agree with you, it must be different. It was not the secularization, and so this difference, I think, is truly interesting when we're thinking about the meeting of cultures. Yes, because it was so important in the context of the Hebrew Jewish culture, and it was absolutely different in the context of European cultures.
Yeah. No, I don't think there is anything comparable within the European theater cultures that I know about taking a holy scripture and putting something of it on the stage in that language, while really telling a story which is very banal in a sense, a very melodramatic story about a woman who loses her lover, and how they meet again, supposedly in the afterlife. But I'm sure that the European audiences, I would not systematically as you have, but I have encountered the reviews in countries which have no Jewish culture at all, like in Scandinavia. They felt this was just magnetic magic. This was theater, holy theater in the epitome. So they felt something that the actors were giving them by their own charisma of being just actors, not yet completely professionalized, but still knowing what they were doing. So here there is a holiness of the theater, but there is a secularization. And then it takes another 30, 40 years after Habima comes to Tel Aviv before it becomes integrated within the Israeli theater culture. And that's a very complex process in itself, what Habima's D-book production means in Israel. And then we come even to the Salamanca D-book in Yiddish with an orchestra playing Smetana's Moldau, which was the melody from which Hatikva was constructed. So there is a lot of irony developed as time goes by, so to say, within that secularization process, because there is also a critique going on. It's not just, now we can speak Hebrew every day, but also we need the tools for carrying out a critique. And that, I think, the Habima production made possible to do such a thing because of its complexity and its multi-leveled existence. So as a sign language, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Diego.
Yeah, Diego can.
Thank you very much, Freddie. I was thinking about your talk, actually, maybe in relation to my own talk later, that what I think that I find very interesting is what is happening with this translation issue, that when Abim and Kafka are thinking on Hebrew or writing Hebrew, are thinking on a specific territories, on the Eretz Israel, and it's related to Hebrew letters or to the Hebrew sound. But I think when Ruth Kanner is working with the notebook, what is interesting for me is actually the opposite way, was the German becomes this looking towards the diasporic land of German, the lost diaspora that is actually the counterpart, the other side of the mirror in this, because I was thinking, oh, it's like a great book, notebook to learn German. So I how this same notebook today can be used for the opposite way than the original Heigeli to the original purpose. That's a remark only.
I'm visiting Galit's study for this, so the Wi-Fi is better here. So yeah, no, that's clear, and I think it was very interesting when the Ruth Kanner company visited for 2 performances Frankfurt, where the audience does not know Hebrew and instead knows German, while the Hebrew audience or the Israeli audience not necessarily knowing German that well. So how this interchange goes on, but that's part of the dialogue, and I think we haven't finished it. I mean, it's going on, and a performance like this can lead to thoughts about that. Yeah. I can't hear you, Olga. Olga, you need to unmute.
Yeah, but you understood that I was saying thank
Yeah,
you.
no, I saw your lips moving.
Yeah. Okay, now it's my turn. Я начну сейчас мою презентацию. Европейские странствия Габимы. And I have one moment. Yeah, it's here. So I'm from the Tel Aviv University and also from the Jewish University in Jerusalem. В январе 1926 года театр Габима, созданный в Москве в 1917 году, покинул пределы России и в течение 5 лет переезжал из страны в страну, из города в город. Карта странствий Габимы включала Восточную, Центральную и Западную Европу, Египет, Палестину и Соединенные Штаты. Надо сказать, что театр и сам на протяжении многих лет относился к своей жизни как к травелогу, многоголосый образ которого обнаруживается простите, я перескочила неправильно. Странствия эти обычно описываются как история головокружительного успеха, триумфального шествия маленького ивритского театра по главным сценам Европы и Америки. Между тем, всемирное турне Габимы представляет сложный феномен. примечательный многими своими составляющими и лишь частично описанные научным дискурсом. Do you hear the translation? Я не поняла вас. Что вы предлагаете? Я не должна вас слышать, да. Да.
Лариса, объясни, пожалуйста, всем, что все, кто хочет слышать перевод на английский, должны зайти в interpretation, да, там у них называется, нажать английский и выключить оригинальный звук. Они будут слышать только твой перевод. Нет, а Ольга должна вообще выйти из этого перевода, он ей не нужен. Просто выключить. Ольга, выключай.
Я могу продолжить? Can I continue? Is it okay now? Okay.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Thank you. Странствия эти обычно описываются как история головокружительного успеха, триумфального шествия маленького еврейского театра по главным сценам Европы и Америки. Между тем, всемирное турне Габимы представляет сложный феномен, примечательный многими своими составляющими и лишь частично описанные научным дискурсом. Для разговора об этом феномене я предлагаю воспользоваться понятием «травелог», то есть слово о путешествии. Изначально это старинный литературный жанр, подразделяющийся на различные поджанры – педагогический травелог, сатирический травелог, паломнический травелог и тому подобное. В современной культурологии травелог определяется как одна из продуктивных форм освоения чужого культурного пространства. В этом смысле разговор о Габиме и ее странствиях между культурами в короткий период, когда ужасы Первой мировой войны чуть отступили, а кошмар Второй мировой войны еще не наступил, может быть особенно интересен. Российский... Sorry, I have a problem with my share screen. No, share screen is not working. Now it's working. Российский культуролог Аксенова в статье «Травелог. Путешествия жанра и жанра путешествий» анализирует этимологию слова «травелог» в сопоставлении со словами «монолог», «диалог», «полилог», указывая на то, что в переводе с греческого эти слова обозначают речь одного, двух или нескольких человек. Исходя из этой словообразовательной модели, можно предположить, что травелог – речь самого путешествия, история, рассказанная самой поездкой, где роль автора велика, однако наравне с ним выступает и другой рассказчик – сам мир, который автор-путешественник открывает. В продолжение этой мысли я хочу рассмотреть всемирное турне Габимы конца 20-х, начала 30-х годов как путешествие, обладающее собственной речью, услышать, описать и изучить которую задача многообещающая. Проблематика соприкосновения культурных пространств и место еврейской культуры и еврейского модернизма, открывающиеся в травелоге Габиме, является предметом данного исследования. Надо сказать, что театр и сам на протяжении многих лет относился к своей жизни как к травелогу, многоголосый образ которого обнаруживается в фотоколлаже конца 40-х годов, где мозаика сцен из разных спектаклей показана как парусное судно, знак продолжающегося и счастливого странствия. Модель жизни странствия и межкультурного бытия заявлена была еще в 19 году в словах Вахтангова о Габиме, опубликованных в записках о передвижном театре. Студия совершенно определенно предполагает уехать в Палестину при первой объективной возможности. Причем время отъезда зависит не столько от внешних условий, заключения мира, возможность спокойного и свободного проезда и прочее, сколько от внутренних причин, то есть степени успешности ее работы. Габима не мыслит своей деятельности иначе, как в полном соединении со своим народом на его исторической родине в Палестине, но вместе с тем порывать связи с корнями ее породившими Московским художественным театром не хочет. Поэтому, вероятно, и в будущем в Москве будет существовать отделение Габимы. Конец цитаты. Позднее в одном из своих венских интервью директор Габимы Нахум Цемах в разговоре о будущем Габимы предложит утопическую для того времени модель транскультурного театра с постоянными площадками в Иерусалиме, Москве и гастрольной базой в США и Европе в 1926 году. Как ни удивительно, в травелоге Габимы до сих пор полно темных мест. Прежде всего, до сих пор не решен вопрос о типологии пятилетнего турне Габимы. И похоже, что даже правление театра не могло бы ответить на вопрос, что именно обозначал их отъезд из Москвы. Гастроли, иммиграцию или осуществление того, что было записано в гимне театра, сочиненного Цемахом. Цитата. «Готовьтесь, готовьтесь для Габимы в Иерусалиме». Понимание этой типологии важно, поскольку ею определяется и характер соприкосновения ивритского театра с пространствами других культур. Отъезд. С точки зрения советских властных структур, театр отправился на зарубежные гастроли, представлять на мировой сцене достижения советского театрального искусства. На этом основании, судя по всему, получено было разрешение на выезд, что было уже совсем непросто в 1926 году, и советские заграничные паспорта, с которыми театр объездил Европу, Америку и в 1928 году даже приехал в Палестину. В Европе, к насмешке палестинской прессы и смущению самих артистов, представители советской дипломатии встречали Габиму с букетами цветов, обязывающими актеров к демонстрации лояльности к советскому строю и запрещали им встречаться с сионистами. Гастроли – слово, широко распространенное в русском театральном лексиконе, происходящее от немецкого «гастроль», две составляющие которого «гость» и «роль» подразумевают выступление на чужой сцене в качестве гостя, то есть приглашенного артиста, и вслед за тем возвращение домой. Однако в Москве никто Габиму не ждал. Те же властные структуры, что отправили театр на гастроли, перед этим лишили его бюджета и какой бы то ни было возможности для продолжения своей деятельности на российской территории. История бедствий Габимы, неоднократных попыток закрыть театр, описана подробно в монографическом исследовании Владислава Иванова и в мемуарной литературе. В конце концов, власти нашли характерное для тоталитарных режимов сатанинское решение, в результате которого Габима прекратила свое существование в Москве, в то время как ее выступления в Европе должны были принести дивиденды тому же самому советскому режиму, что задушил ее деятельность в России. В любом случае, вернуться в Москву на свою сцену театр не имел возможности, и гастролями это всемирное турне Габимы назвать нельзя. Театр вынужден был покинуть Москву, и отъезд его можно назвать вынужденной эмиграцией. Цемах, как известно, боролся до последнего против этого отъезда, писал письма, объясняющие феномен Габимы и ее связь с русским театром. Запутанность внутренней и внешней позиции Габимы путала и окружающий мир. Так Маргот Клаузнер, ангел-покровитель театра в Германии, сделавшая много для налаживания связей театра с немецкой еврейской общиной, убежденная в том, что Габима представляет идеалы и ценности социалистического общества, с удивлением писала в своем дневнике, что артисты театра поселяются в гостинице вместе с белоэмигрантами, прекрасно себя чувствуют в их обществе и предпочитают это общество представителям пролетарского государственного строя. В то же самое время Внутри театра причины отъезда понимались по-разному. В вышеупомянутом гимне Габимы, сочиненном Цемахом, на разные лады утверждалось, что предназначение Габимы – стать театром в Иерусалиме. Мы построим Габиму в Иерусалиме, наш дом Габима в Иерусалиме. Другими словами, гимн Габимы провозглашал самый факт отъезда из Москвы в Иерусалим как высшую цель, оправдывавшую существование этого театра. В этом свете, когда домом провозглашалось не то место, где театр родился и играл свои спектакли, Москва, но место мечтаний, Иерусалим, отъезд из Москвы и последующее за этим турне не могут быть определены как гастроли. Мечтательная составляющая травелога Габимы выходит здесь на первый план, и она существенна для понимания характера этого травелога. Мечта о Иерусалиме и о пути в Иерусалим, изначально присутствовавшая в травелоге Габимы, противоположна была идее гастролей, так же, как и идее иммиграции. Можно сказать, что мечта эта нашла выражение в образном строе московских спектаклей, где дорога, странники и распутье получили визуально-поэтическое выражение, всякий раз при этом оказываясь связанными с образами сцены. Отъезд Габимы из Москвы был событием судьбоносным, в высшей степени противоречивым. Каждая из описанных выше причин отъезда противоречила другой и опровергала его. Наконец, реальность самого турне опровергала и все перечисленные выше характеристики. В реальности театр, покинув Москву, не отправился в Палестину, а надолго остался в Европе. Главным местом его нахождения стала Германия, где трудно было найти город, где Габима не играла бы свои спектакли. Из Германии театр выезжал в другие страны: Австрию, Италию, Францию, Бельгию, США, Англию, Данию, Швецию, Польшу. Мечта о Иерусалиме, таким образом, была отложена в долгий ящик. Когда в 1928 году Габима решилась все-таки отправиться в Палестину, единого мнения по этому поводу в труппе не было. Поездка осуществлялась на деньги немецкой еврейской общины и в какой-то мере была воплощением сионистской мечты еврейской общины Германии, а не Габимы. К тому же Палестина была в списке стран, куда обладателям советского паспорта въезд был запрещен. Нарушение этого запрета чревато было потерей советского гражданства и окончательно прекращало иллюзию зарубежных гастролей советского театра. Многие актеры этого опасались и возмущены были безответственным с их точки зрения решением о включении Палестины в турне. Целая группа актеров Габимы впоследствии, уже после поездки в Палестину, вернулась в Россию. Среди них были и ведущие актеры театра – Пруткин, Иткин, Виньяр. Аудитория. Действительность габимовского турне отличалась еще одним важным моментом – небывалой разнородностью зрительской аудитории и особо близкими отношениями театра одновременно совершенно разными зрительскими общинами. Это подтверждается сотнями рецензий и газетных статей на разных языках, посвященных спектаклям театра и его рецепции. Прежде всего, Габима с восторгом принята была еврейскими общинами прибалтийских стран, Польши и Германии. Идишская пресса восторженно писала о спектаклях театра, немало не упрекая его в том, что спектакли играются на иврите. Габима принималась идишским миром как свой театр, достижение национального еврейского театрального искусства и предмет для гордости. В 1926 году, когда театр прибыл в Ригу и там открыл свое пятилетнее турне, рижская газета на идише сообщала: вместе с поднятием занавеса на первом же представлении Габимы начался праздник для всех любителей еврейского искусства. Для нас Габима является прежде всего великим художественным явлением, выражением художественных чувств еврейского народа. Год спустя в американской идишской прессе появилась заметка, автор которой заявлял: «Я не театральный критик и не претендую на это звание, но я верю в то, что о Габиме каждый не только может, но и должен писать. Важнее всего то, что Габима воплощает инстинктивное единство еврейства». Вместе с тем афиши театра в 1926 году печатались не только на иврите, еврейском языке, но также и на русском, литовском и латвийском. Полина Пайлес указывает на то, что в Ковно афиши Габимы публиковались в газетах на идише, в литовской прессе и в русской газете «Эхо». Русская эмигрантская пресса освещала турне театра самым внимательным образом. Куда бы Габима ни приезжала, ведущие эмигрантские газеты «Руль» в Берлине, «Рассвет», «Последние новости» в Париже, «Русское слово» в Америке публиковали рецензии на спектакли театра и способствовали интересу к его деятельности в русском эмигрантском обществе. Когда театр приехал в Прибалтику, русская пресса сообщала, билеты на спектакли театра в Латвии и Литве были дорогими, несмотря на высокие цены, почти в 1,5 раза превышающие рижские. Еще до объявления гастролей была расписана половина билетов. В июне 26-го князь Волконский опубликовал серию статей о спектаклях Габимы, где размышлял о том, как у зрителей, не знающих иврита, возникает понимание происходящего на сцене. Цитата. «Незнакомый язык всегда ложится более или менее непроницаемой средой между текстом и нашим разумом. Но та чрезмерность интонации, которая всегда присуща всякой истинной трагедии, в данном случае являлась толковательницей того, что в слове было непонятно». Конец цитаты. Последняя его статья о Габиме завершалась словами «Хотелось бы увидеть Цемаха в роли Отелло». Георгий Адамович, поэт и критик, законодатель литературного вкуса в эмигрантских художественных кругах, опубликовал подробный анализ Гадибука, отметив, что спектакль этот сопоставим с поэтическими шедеврами Блока. Словом, Габима, несомненно, была часть художественного мира русской эмиграции, а русская эмиграция составляла часть зрительской аудитории театра. Наряду с аудиторией еврейских общин и русскими эмигрантами к зрителям Габимы, несомненно, принадлежали театральные круги Европы и Америки. По количеству рецензий на спектакли Габимы с идишской прессой соревновалась немецкая. В Германии выпущена была уникальная афиша, составленная из цитат, прославляющих Габиму, без обычных на афише указаний имени спектакля, дня и времени его представления. Текст афиши гласил, здесь вы ее видите как раз, вот эта афиша. Габима на немецкой сцене – одно из важнейших театральных событий нашего времени. Бурные аплодисменты выражают восторг публики. По свидетельству венского корреспондента газеты «Рассвет» в 1926 году, цитата, «Габима стала сенсацией и гвоздем последнего театрального сезона в Вене. Даже антисемитские органы печати сочувственно отозвались о театре. Интереснее всего впечатление, произведенное театром в ассимиляционных, так называемых либеральных кругах немецкого общества, немецкого еврейства. Макс Райнхард, ежедневный гость театра, не пропускает случая, чтобы не высказать свое восхищение завоеваниями еврейской национальной культуры. Конец цитаты. Наконец, в Англии 2 статьи по поводу выступлений Габимы в Лондоне написаны были Гордоном Крэгом, сообщавшим читателям Daily Telegraph, «The D-book will be played again during their visit, and all London should go». Многоликость зрительской аудитории Габимы оказалась залогом успеха театра. Однако в рамках данного рассуждения интересно другое. Описанный выше феномен практически оспаривает теоретическую парадигму травелога, изучаемую с использованием понятий агрессия, узурпация, желание, разведка в рамках постколониальной теории, предлагаемую на страницах журнала Travel Poetics. Парадигма эта базируется на дихотомии «свой-чужой» и опровергается опытом Габимы, оказавшейся своей для очень разных групп населения. Отношения Габимы с другими культурами в Европе и Америке, встреченными театром во время его турне, не укладываются в понятия агрессия и узурпация, в то время как желание и разведка в контексте этого турне вряд ли могут быть приняты как выражение постколониализма. В то же самое время детерриториализация, наличествовавшая в турне Габимы, была достаточно успешной и не завершилась дегуманизацией. Для изучения травелога Габимы я бы предложила иную, не смысловую, но структурную модель, основными составляющими которой могут быть причины предпринятого путешествия, у любого путешествия есть причины, основные остановки во время этого пути и то, что называется дорожными историями. Все 3 эти компонента представляют речь путешествия, изучение которой позволяет нам не программировать скрытые смыслы, но открывать их. Эта в значительной степени свободная от идеологических установок модель представляется мне продуктивной. В завершение моего сообщения и вместо заключения я хотел бы предложить две дорожные истории Габина. Первая история рассказывается в дневнике Клаузнера. Она о том, как по дороге в Палестину в 1928 году, уже будучи на корабле, она решила с гордостью показать труппе, что втайне от них подготовила переиздание брошюры, представляющей театр и его историю. Увидев в этой брошюре портрет Цемаха, актеры потребовали от нее весь тираж и всю ночь вырезали ножницами изображение своего бывшего директора, предавшего с их точки зрения дело театра и оставшегося в Америке. Клаузнер была поражена. Неистовость гнева была ей непонятна, а самый акт уничтожения портрета показался гротескным. Вторая история рассказана в мемуарной книге Шимона Финкеля, одного из ведущих актеров театра, принятого в труппу в начале 30-х. Во время второго европейского турне Габины в 1937 году, получив гран-при на Всемирной выставке в Париже, окрыленная успехом труппа решила попытаться получить разрешение на представление своих спектаклей в Центре еврейской культуры в Берлине, чудом еще не прекратившим свое существование. Правление театра отправило телеграмму Геббельсу, любителю театрального искусства, опубликовавшим, по словам Финкеля, положительную рецензию на спектакле Габимы в 1927 году. Геббельс разрешил играть спектакли на иврите, что было двойным чудом, чудом смелости артистов и чудом торжества искусства над жизнью. Однако к тому моменту, когда труппа прибыла на Берлинский вокзал, разрешение уже было отменено приказом Геринга. Не выходя с территории вокзала, актеры пересели на поезд, отправлявшийся в Ковно, и повезли туда свои спектакли. Ари Глазман, идишский модернистский поэт, посмотревший спектакли театра в 1937 году в Ковно, описал свои впечатления в небольшой заметке. Цитата. «До того, как я увидел спектакль Габимы, я полагал, что только музыка говорит всемирным языком. Теперь я понимаю, что театр также может обращаться ко всем народам. Национальное произведение театрального искусства открывается нам в своей универсальной и общечеловеческой природе». Так дорожные истории странствий Габимы рассказывают нам о возможности единства национального, художественного и универсального в трагической истории столетия, в трагической истории 20-го столетия. Однако все предложенное вашему вниманию – это лишь предварительные заметки к исследованию травелога Габимы. That's all. And my last picture is a kind of poster that was done by Habima in order to show, Habima B'Masaot, Habima Towers, to show and to celebrate their towers in 20s and 30s. I don't know why it's here now. Okay. Yeah, thank you. I hope that it was possible to understand something from my presentation. Yes, please.
I have a question, if I may start.
Yeah.
Do you have any information about why the Germany tour was canceled? You talked about Goebbels first giving his permission and then withdrawing it.
Then Herring, not Goebbels, but Goebbels, yes, did the permission for Habima, and it was very strange, of course, in 1937. But and maybe it was a mistake. But then Herring, I said Goering because in Russian we're saying Goering, but it was Herring. He decided not to permit to Jewish theater to perform their plays in Berlin in 1937.
Okay, coming from German, I'm actually surprised that they withdrew the permission, because in 1937, the idea was that, because there existed the so-called Jewish Cultural Association, and Berlin was a very strong center for that. And one of the things that they were pushing for was even for, German Jewish artists to to perform in Hebrew or whatever they deemed as the the Jewish language. They wanted to promote the Jewish culture within that very ghetto-like space.
Yeah.
So my surprise is that they withdrew it, because they insist on having, and I don't remember the year, but they insist on having a performance done at the same time in Hebrew and Yiddish, so as to prove to the German Jewish audiences who were allowed to attend the Jüdischer Kulturbund that there were Jewish languages, and they should, learn one of them and deal with that as being part of their identity and leave German out of it.
Yeah, so thank you for your comment. What we have in the Tel Aviv Archive, we have the real document, the text of the telegram that was sent to Hebels when they were asking for this permission. The rest of the story was told by Shimon Finkel in his book, that there was no possibility really to perform without explanation. He just told that Herring decided not to give this permission, and they even decided not to enter to Berlin. They were at the railway station, took another train, and continued to Kovna. But this really one of, I presented here only the fabula of the story, but every story must be investigated, and there are a lot of, it's fantastic story, I think, but there are a lot of details that still must be revealed. And
it's a fascinating story, thank you.
Yeah, and there are a lot of fascinating stories. So I'm dreaming about a kind of a book based on these fascinating stories, of course, together with analysis of different details. Yeah, thank you.
I'm waiting to read that book.
Thank you. Yair, you wanted to ask something?
It's more of a comment, but I was thinking about how what you were telling about the debates whether to reach Palestine or not to reach Palestine, and the Habima anthem. That this somehow I think is kind of paradigmatic, like to a wider sense of Jewish wandering. That saying next year in Jerusalem, but not necessarily wanting to be next year in Jerusalem. I mean, this kind of making Palestine or Jerusalem this kind of like keeping it in the horizon versus actually going there. And so like the place of the anthem as kind of saying this is where we wish to reach to go doesn't necessarily mean we're actually going to relocate to Palestine, and how this kind of encapsulates like a wider issue going on.
I think that initially it was a dream, and the dream component is very important in wandering stories. Yes, when it became the reality and not the dream, this is another story and another reasons for it. But at the beginning, the dream is it's like a poem, actually. Yes, thank you.
Thank you for this. It was very interesting.
Yeah. Okay, do we have more questions? Yes, Freddie.
Yeah, it was interesting that you had a review by Gordon Craig. At that point, the translation or the reception was a little muddled, so I didn't get if you gave a quote. But do you have any collection of reviews that are from theater people, specifically not people who are critics, but people who work in the theater? Do you have that as a category for your research?
In my research, yes. In the archive, we have it as a independent category. Is just part of reviews that were published in English newspapers, and a lot of reviews were published, and also very interesting photos, not from Germany, but they did something exclusive for the D-book performance in London. Yes, there are two articles written by, not reviews, really articles written by Gordon Craig about Habima, about the language of Habima, about the importance of Habima. I presented short quotation from this article where Craig said that everyone in London should go and see the D-book. That this is must.
No, because the question is, how does the D-book enter European theater history?
Yes, of course. And if I'm talking not about Gordon Craig, as yes, there are articles from German theater critics and a lot of articles from Yiddish theater critics, and this is extremely interesting. No contradiction between Yiddish and Hebrew at all, and interesting reviews and articles about Habima and about artistic language of Habima and importance of this artistic language. And it's interesting how this contradiction was created in Soviet Russia, and then how was it created in not Soviet Israel, yes, but there's actually two places where we have this contradiction story between Yiddish culture and or Yiddish art and Hebrew art. From this point of view, Yiddish press is very interesting. Yes, Diego.
Thank you, Olga, for the talk and the presentation and the great materials. I wanted to ask if there is, did you find, or maybe you didn't get to that yet, any similitude with the trips that the Wiener Truppe did? If there is any coincidence in those, in the cities, in the type of, because the D-book was also presented through the Wiener Truppe. If there is some coincidences, there in the reviews there are some references to the Wiener Truppe or connections or cities that are being like, how those different trips are meeting or not at all, maybe.
This is very important subject for the research. There are references, but I have to continue to look for these materials. In the references that I already saw, most of the theater critics or those who were writing about Habima's performance, they praised it actually more than the D-book of the Wiener Truppe. They said that it was interesting when they saw this version of the D-book, but after Vakhtangov, it is impossible to come back to it. But maybe I cannot say that I read all of the reviews, a lot of them, but not all of them. So this is the impression. I'm trying to read a lot of materials, not only to base my opinion on the impression.
And this is Dina Kunich. Okay, so 3 legendary milestones mark Romania's legacy with Yiddish.
Corina?
Yes.
We don't see the presentation. We see your windows.
Oh. Okay, let's.
I have just to open it.
Okay, because I see the presentation.
maybe you have to share another window. Like when you have the option to share, check out, you choose the presentation.
Okay.
First open presentation and then share the screen.
Yes, that's what I did, and I saw the presentation, but
just try once more, because sometimes it's not working.
yeah.
And then
Okay. How about now?
yeah, okay.
Okay, I will. Okay. Okay. So, 3 legendary milestones mark Romania's legacy with Yiddish theater. Its first theatrical productions under founder Avram Goldfaden in Iași in 1876, the presence of a Vilna troupe in Bucharest between 1923 and 1927, and the establishment of Teatrul Evreesc de Stat Jewish State Theater short TESS in Bucharest in 1948. Between and beyond these defining moments, the theater was sustained by those who pressed forward with an array of theatrical opportunities under a range of circumstances, including wars and dictatorships. Small and large companies led to the proliferation of Yiddish theatrical art and launched unforgettable performers such as Joseph Bulov, Molly Peiken, Jakob Kalich, Sidi Tal, Sevilla Pastor, and last but not least, the actress whose life and artistic activity are the topic of this presentation, Dina Kunich. In my presentation, I draw attention to how historical contingency on the one hand and an enduring commitment to theater art on the other shaped Kunich's existence to demonstrate a model that was replicated many times over during Yiddish theater's history. That is, women who made Yiddish theater into a family matter, who operated with financial independence, who aspired to do art, but were pragmatic enough to be flexible when their lives depended on it. In Kunich's case, the proportionate combination of commitment and flexibility reveals her devotion to theater, but also to survival, and it was a key to her longevity on stage. Dina Kunich was born in 1907 in Lodz, still in the Russian Empire, where she first began performing. She grew up in the theater since her father was a tailor and her mother was a seamstress who made costumes for the local Yiddish companies. Kunich is said to have debuted when she was only 4 years old in Zalman Lieben's play Gebrochene Herzen, and to have enchanted none other than the Yiddish cultural icon Isaac Leibus Perez himself when she performed in his play Die Schwester. In this performance, staged by Julius Adler at his Lodz-based Scala Theater, Kunich sang Was is a Mensch, nor Erd und Stäub von Verem a Räub, heint in a Stub, morgen in Grub und Stumm und Taub. With the same ensemble, she performed the role of Yiddele in 1914 in the adaptation of the novel Die Schreckliche Säudes by L. Schreiber. By 1915, she was taking dance and singing lessons and charmed her audiences with couplets in Yiddish, Polish, and Russian. She continued to perform in her hometown until 1920, when Adler left for America. Although not native to Romania, Kunich arrived there in 1923, when the renowned impresario David Kelzmeister arranged for her to perform in Bucharest in a revue entitled Bucharest, New York by Ben Ely. The show took place at an outdoor summer theater that also had a beer garden and was in the heart of the city's Jewish district along Bucharest Road. She also appeared in the poet and humorist Ion Pribagu's show Hocus Pocus, singing in Romanian and launching the Schlager Eu sunt parfumul, I am the perfume, which became a classic in Bucharest. Pribagu recommended Kunich as a cabaret singer and dancer to another beer garden, Alcazar, on the posher Victoria Road, where she performed mostly for non-Yiddish speaking audiences. During the same time, she acted on the Yiddish stage in Bel Segal's troupe along Vera Kanevska, Suni Serebrov, and Adolf Tefner, both in Bucharest and on tours throughout the country. It was, according to theater critic Julian Schwarz, during one of the shows in the provincial town of Fălticeni in eastern Romania that Kunich got her big breakthrough when the lead actress, Kanevska, fell ill and Kunich stepped in for her. Her successful performance cemented her reputation as a versatile singer and presented her as a gifted, serious actress. By the summer of 1924, Schwarz contends, she was already a star of the Yiddish stage who performed in Bucharest and throughout Greater Romania to audiences that valued her artistic abilities and her rich repertoire. Upon her arrival in Bucharest in 1923, Kunich had met the actor Josef Kamen from one of the Vilna troupes. This most famous and celebrated Yiddish ensemble had come to Bucharest at the invitation of Isidor Goldenberg, owner of the reputed beer garden with a stage, Zhignitsa, where Goldfaden himself had performed in 1877. The Vilna ensemble that had arrived in Bucharest was the one managed by Mordechai Mazo, and who was the manager, but also the impresario. In 1927, Kunich married Kamen in Czernowitz, and they began performing side by side with Mazo's Vilna troupe, and that's the two of them. Kunich and Kamen were visiting her parents in Lodz in 1929 when their daughter Leah was born on November 30th. Given her parents' peripatetic lifestyle, Leah spent her early childhood in Lodz with her maternal grandmother, who was alone after her husband had passed away. After Mazo's troupe had fallen apart in Bucharest in 1927, Kunich and Kamen had joined other ensembles in Bucharest, and by 1931, Kamen, alongside Simke Natan, had a troupe at Teatru Liber, or the Free Theater. And that's a picture with fans welcoming Dina. For its performances of David Bergelson's play Die Broitmeal, the company received positive reviews that highlighted both Kunich's and Kamen's stagecraft. The theater critic of the journal The Morning lauded Kunich for her, quote, dignified acting, while critic Mihail Sebastian celebrated Kamen's, quote, exceptional art. In 1938, Kunich formed her own theater company called Thalia and performed mostly melodramas and operettas meant to entertain a public that was ever more harassed as anti-Semitism was on the rise in Romania in the late 1930s. These popular performances alleviated the family's financial distress, which had caused tensions between Kunich and her husband, since Kamen refused to act in anything else but classical theater. When the war broke out in September of 1939, Kunich was on tour in Czernowitz. As the clouds of war gathered over Europe, she brought her daughter and mother along. The three were never separated again until the grandmother passed away. At the same time, Kamen, who had suffered a leg amputation due to health problems, was touring Poland with a one-man show said to have been another great success for him. After her performances in Czernowitz, Kunich moved on to Kishinev, where the famed Yankev Sternberg was the artistic director of a newly founded theater subsidized by the Soviet government. As part of the agreements of the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact, the Soviet Union had annexed Bessarabia and Bukovina in late June and early July 1940. Once they had taken over Kishinev, to ingratiate themselves with the local population, the Soviet authorities financed the creation of a Yiddish theater in the Bessarabian capital and appointed Sternberg to lead it artistically. He invited Kunich to join the company as he staged Goldfaden's Die Kischefmacherin. The production earned him praise from none other than Benjamin Susskind, who attended the premiere. And that's Dina with the red marking on it, and the other one is Susskind. When Operation Barbarossa began on June 22, 1941, and Romanian troops advanced into Bessarabia and Bukovina alongside the German army, Kunich and her family, together with other actors, were evicted further east into the Soviet Union. The theater's next premiere, that was scheduled for July 28, 1941, never took place. Kunich stopped in Uzbekistan, where she resumed performing in Tashkent and Samarkand. In the latter location, she worked with the Moldavish Jazz Orchestra, led by Shiko Aronov, and performed throughout the Soviet Union in military hospitals, factories, and even at the front. Before he could reunite with his wife and daughter, Kamen died of diabetes in 1942 in Uralsk, Kazakhstan. In 1944, Kunich married another actor of the Yiddish stage, Isaac Havis, who was originally from Bessarabia. As the Soviet counteroffensive began to gain momentum, and particularly after Romania turned against its former German ally on August 23, 1944, Kunich, her new husband, and the 15-year-old Leah made their way back to Chernouts, now officially called Chernovitsky. I'm sure I mispronounced that. Even though Kunich had sympathized with the political left in the pre-war years and had valued the brief time she had spent in Kishinev as a member of the Sternberg ensemble that was state subsidized, she did not want to remain in a Soviet territory after the war. Her family had experienced the Soviet regime firsthand during their time in Uzbekistan, and Kunich and Havis were determined to escape it. The family crossed illegally into Romania through the township Siret on the homonymous river and traveled on to Bucharest. By July 1946, both Kunich and Havis were already members of the local artists' union, performed side by side in the city, but also toured the country with classic shows such as Jakob Gordin, Kreutzer Sonat, and Goldfaden Shulamis. Having witnessed Sternberg's successes both in Bucharest and Kishinev, with performances equally indebted to his avant-gardistic artistic vision and his leftist ideology, Kunich saw no contradiction between Yiddish art theater's emphasis on experimentation, innovation, and cross-fertilization, and the ideals of the left, which took hold of Romania gradually between August 44 and December 47. Yet post-war socialists made more demands on its artists the closer it drew to becoming a state ideology. The new Romanian authorities showed their support for Yiddish culture, particularly for the theater. However, they also monitored its existence, strategically co-opting it for their own purposes through the leftist organization Jiddischer Kulturverband, short IKUF. Thus, the establishment favored IKUF and its cultural forums, for example, the IKUF Theater, over other organizations and companies promoting Yiddish culture with the goal of controlling it. By March 1948, private enterprise was no longer possible in Romania, and anyone determined to participate in the production of Yiddish theater in the country had to enroll in the IKUF Theater, which the state already subsidized. The authorities then transformed and simply renamed the ensemble into Teatrul Evreiesc de Stat, the Jewish State Theater, on August 1st, 1948. This was carried out unceremoniously while the ensemble was on tour in the country with Sholem Aleichen's Das große Gewinn. Oh, sorry, this is Dina and Havis, and this is for performance late in their life, not when they met. And then this is Das große Gewinn. Kunich joined the IKUF theater, hopeful that the authorities would not restrict its artistic agenda. On January 11th, 1948, she had begun rehearsals for Sholem Aleichem's play. After almost 30 years of professional instability, she welcomed the prospect of a stable income and a stationary life that presented to the family the chance to strike roots. She envisioned settling down, offering Leah an education, and going on tours rather than touring permanently. None of these changes meant that she would stop evolving artistically. It simply reflected her desire for permanence and a balanced family existence. Belonging to a company that had to comply with some rules and regulations of the new Romanian state seemed secondary compared to secure employment and a steady income that would allow her and her husband to live together and provide for themselves and her young daughter. Her disillusionment with the Soviet Union during the war did not mean that she equaled socialism with Stalinism. She presumed that in Romania, things could be different. Furthermore, she had already worked in a state-funded theater during her time in Kishinev in 1940, where the artistic director Sternberg had managed to offset Soviet ideological demands and produce high-quality theater. Relying on the presence of other interwar artists such as Maurice Sekler, Beno Poplica, or Sevilla Pastor, she believed that the Ikuf theater and later Tess could do the same. Yet in the long run, Kunich grew weary, and her utter disenchantment with socialists moved her to apply for immigration to Israel, despite being named Artista Emerita in 1956. Her and Havis's visa application had just been approved when she died of renal failure on May 17, 1964. A year after her death, the actor Karol Feldman remembered her as a powerful presence who, quote, dominated the stage and the theater hall with the grace of a queen, and whose voice complemented this majesty, a strong, convincing voice, yet equally endearing, end of quote. Her career with Tess spanned 16 years, and her last role was tellingly Mother Courage in Bertolt Brecht's anti-war drama. And this is her. Kind of to wrap things up, in her analysis of the Vilna Truppe's Dybbuk performance in 1920, theater scholar Deborah Kaplan states that ultimately the company strove to transform the Yiddish stage into a, quote, sacred cultural space, end of quote, that fused together trans-European artistic practices, quote, within a decisively Jewish framework, end of quote. Dina Kunich's life as an artist of the Yiddish stage personified this idea through her tenacious adherence to the standards of Yiddish art theater. Beyond the personal narrative behind her life, Kunich's story also speaks to the significance of strong, independent, and progressive women for the proliferation of Yiddish theater. While events and elements beyond her control, World War II, displacement, the Shoah, and authoritarian regimes shaped her life, she persevered, never abandoning her commitment to stagecraft. While she found her calling in art theater, her desire to produce art did not render her recalcitrant to life's needs, which at times required commercial work. She lived off her theatrical abilities and found her strength in theater too. She married in the theater and sustained her career with the support of the family, who reinforced her creative decisions. She raised her daughter in the theater and fostered her talent once she was convinced of it. Kunich's collaboration with the Vilna Truppe in the 1920s defined the rest of her career. Yet the company's fame sprang not only from its radical notion of artistic freedom that fused various approaches to performance, but also from its ability to capitalize on itineracy as a stepping stone for artistic innovation. With itineracy came also a precarious quotidian existence, which combined with the destruction and uncertainties brought about by World War II, led Kunich to embrace the idea of a resident, state-funded Yiddish theater. When Romania became a so-called people's democracy, after her family had settled there in the mid-40s, Kunich hoped that, in line with its lofty goals, socialism would afford Jews the same rights as other people and give Yiddish theater a fair chance to succeed. As promises turned into lies, however, she mastered the courage to attempt to redefine her life anew. She overcame both her fear of persecution by Romania's secret police Securitate and her insecurities about uprooting her life one more time at a mature age and without any knowledge of Hebrew, and applied for immigration to Israel in 1958. She counted on the freedom of expression granted under the laws of Israel's democracy and her talent to see her through another relocation. For the first time, and given the particular context of a Jewish state, she also considered setting Yiddish aside and embracing the state's national language, Hebrew, to give voice to her artistic calling. By no means was this a betrayal of Yiddish theater, but rather an expression of her own notion of Jewish theatrical art. It was also a pragmatic decision to integrate into the new country and a means to combine artistic freedom with a secure livelihood by ascending to its cultural mainstream. Kunich did not live to rebuild her life and career one more time, or to see her daughter fulfill her own dream of glory on stage. She did nevertheless see Leah and her husband through the difficult times of their emigration and advised them on how to best approach life in the free world, which they had never known. And this free world had held many opportunities, but also more professional risks than they had ever known in Romania. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Corina. I think that it's really interesting how we have correspondences between materials that were presented in this panel, and for me it makes it extremely interesting. So now there is time for questions.
If I may
Of course.
First of all, thank you. It was fascinating. I mean, okay.
Okay. Yes, thank you for the question. So at the time, there was enough. I mean, the tests of the Jewish State Theater still exists to this day. But there's a big difference between the audience that it has now and the audience that still existed there in the 50s and 60s. And while the 50s and 60s are the times of the great Jewish migration from Romania, by the time, as long as she's there, so by the mid-60s, that's when it becomes rather dramatic in terms of the shrinking audiences. But at the time that she was there still is enough of an audience. And there are enough people who had started their careers in the interwar time where people came to see them. So even though the theater was, was an ensemble theater. So you didn't go there to see a star, because God forbid, right? It was very bad to be a star, right? In a socialist country. The reality behind it was very different. So people would go to see Dina Kunich or Sevilla Pastor or any of the other interwar stars. The reason why she only gets her permission to emigrate so late is because the authorities are, they're monitoring and they're playing cat and mouse in a little way, in some way with families, right? Leah and her husband had received the permission to immigrate a lot earlier. But at that time, Dina and Havis's permissions were not granted. Yeah. So the family was split. Yeah. Right. And then they get the permission, even though, they apply in 1958 at the same time as Leah and her husband applied, right? But Leah gets it and they don't, right? And they get it in 64, but it's too late for her. Yeah. Right. So that was the way, the fact that, she gains recognition because she's an eminent artist and she's recognized as a strong artistic presence. But at the same time, once you applied for immigration, you started feeling the consequences in one way or the other, right? And in their case, this was, breaking the family apart. And
yeah. Thank you.
Sure.
More questions? Can you say something about the typology of these wanderings of your personage?
I think in a way she's representative for what Yiddish theater was in the early 20th century. All the way to the time of the war, right? Because it was this notion of you are on tour and you go where the audiences are and the audiences love you and you keep going. And right, she learns the value of this permanent touring and being in permanent touch with new ideas that you meet in different locations because of her involvement with the Vilna Truppe. But then once the war starts, right, it's a forced kind of traveling because, from what I gathered from the materials that I had, she was not interested in going any further east than, Kishinev maybe. So going to Uzbekistan or Kazakhstan was not part of her plan, right? But it was a way to survive, right? And she was pragmatic enough to realize that survival was also part of the game. And she was a mother, so she had a child to take care of. And while Kamen kind of, well, he was an artist too. He was more of a lofty artist in a way, right? He did not want to perform in anything that wasn't deemed classical theater or art theater. And that caused friction between them. And that's why they were separated for quite a long time. There are also rumors of him, having affairs while they were separated. But the bottom line is that she was pragmatic enough to survive, right? And he ends up staying in behind for too long, and then has problems escaping, and then dies of diabetes. And they never get to see each other, I think, for 3 years before he dies at least. Whereas I don't know, maybe it was the pragmatism of a mother who had to care for her daughter, and realizing that, in a family, somebody has to be with both feet on the ground and not just think about art, but also think about the everyday and make that work.
Yeah, I see. The question of survival really is very interesting in different contexts.
Yeah.
Yes, Diego.
No.
Do we have questions for Diego? Yes. Karina, please.
Thank you very much, Diego. This was fascinating. What happened to your replica?
Okay, I will tell you two things. Our replica is still being exhibited at the Hansen House, but now actually, okay, I will tell you what is the next step that we are planning, and I would like to do, but it's complicated. But it's on the plan is to bring this replica back to Fisher, to the original garden where the original sukkah was actually placed. So that's the project, in order to, in a way, convert the Fisher in a type of living museum, or, so we have to see if it will happen or not. But now it's going to be exhibited in a museum, Ramat Gan Museum. They are lending this sukkah to be exhibited there. So it's going to be one in the Israel Museum. It's part of the permanent exhibition. And the second one, our one, is going to be for 6 months at the Ramat Gan Museum. Freddy.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Diego. Could you develop some more thinking or thoughts about longing and belonging in this context?
I don't know. I think that talking through the objects itself, I think that this dichotomy is what actually the sukkah is in a way able not to represent, but to reflect in both families, like let's say in the Deller family in Germany and in our family in Jerusalem, and it's happening also in the other sukkot we did. I didn't tell about those sukkot here, but I think it's all the time dealing with this metach, with this tension between longing and belonging. I think that that's part of what this idea of home, temporary home, is in a way reflecting. Yes, I don't know if I answered. I need more time to go further and deeper. But when I mentioned, if I think about the first sukkah that I did show a little bit here, the Bedouin sukkah, it's also dealing with this longing and belonging in another way, in another sense, and is dealing also with some of the topics that were touched here today, with the destruction of the temple, with Jerusalem, also the Sukkah itself, also the specific Sukkot themselves, this Bedouin Sukkah with this specific situation of the Bedouin community, the Deller Sukkah with the Jewish Germany community, the Holocaust, of course, and there is the third Sukkah that I didn't show and didn't talk about it, but it's referring a little bit about us, but also about it was done in Canada. It's reflecting or dealing with the absence of the indigenous communities in Canada. That actually became last month like a very hot topic in the news because of the late discoveries.
More questions? Diego, I think that the relationships between research, performance, and wandering were so interesting in your presentation, and in this sense, it was really brilliant ending for our session. And I think I have a feeling that it was a kind of Greek symposium today. That what we're doing in this panel, talking about different aspects of wandering and its connection to theater issues from really so different point of views, and that was truly interesting. So, do you want to say something? Well, I'm saying thank you so much. Okay, so thank you so much for taking part in this panel symposium, in talking about eternal Jews, Jewish theater, wandering, and all these fascinating topics. And hope we'll meet in another conferences in Moscow, not in Moscow. Thank you.
Thank you, Olga, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you all for this great panel. Thank you, Olga, for organizing it.
Yeah, thank you very much, Olga.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody for interesting.